Welcome to today's episode of Heute bist stürmisch, the everyday informative podcast with your host, Olli Schmidt. In episode 14, we delved into the topic of ADHD in children, back then with our special guest, Sabina Pahlke. The topic was so incredibly interesting and well received by our audience that we decided we absolutely had to revisit it in more depth. We've received numerous inquiries, and we also see in our consultancy work that ADHD in adults is a very significant, multifaceted and intriguing topic for many people who are seeking to understand it better. That's precisely why we're discussing it today. Sabina Pahlke was kind enough to say, of course, I'm happy to explain it to you again in detail, including any recent developments. So we're talking about what ADHD in adulthood is, what symptoms exist, what it means for people to live with an undiagnosed condition, and what advantages ADHD might have, for example, in the workplace or in personal relationships where communication is key. These topics are vital for understanding the broader implications of the condition. Today, I'm having this conversation with Sabina Pahlke. And for those who don't know her yet, Sabina is a well-respected systemic supervisor and consultant, a mother of 2 children with ADHD who are now adults, and she has been an experienced ADHD parent coach since 2010. Hello, Sabina. It's great to finally have you back here with us.
Hello, Olli. Thank you very much for having me here once again. You've already mentioned many exciting topics in the introduction, and I'm genuinely looking forward to the questions and hope I can give appropriate answers that will be helpful.
I am absolutely sure that you can do it. That's precisely why we invited you again, and I genuinely believe in your capabilities. And yes, I've already touched a bit on what we want to discuss, starting with the engaging and timely topic of ADHD in social media. It seems to be trending quite a bit right now, capturing the attention of a wide audience. We see numerous people on TikTok and Instagram openly discussing their experiences with ADHD. For example, influencers like Lisa Vogel and Vanessa Ebert are openly talking about their personal lives with ADHD. They don't just stop there. They write insightful books about their experiences, and they have amassed many followers who look up to them for guidance and support. It seems to be a bit of a hype right now. In your opinion, why do you think so many people are actively talking about ADHD these days?
Well, I think the people who were diagnosed many years ago during their school years are now adults and are naturally using the multitude of media we have today to address this important topic that affects their lives. And now it is also the case that people affected by ADHD, not all but many, are increasingly active and engaged in the digital space. It's a fast-paced world filled with endless information where the brain can be activated relatively quickly. You can network well, present yourself well, and share experiences globally. From this perspective, it's certainly a nice place for those with ADHD to discuss their symptoms and share their experiences with others who may understand. And as you mentioned, there's a huge reach to have your voice heard by a diverse audience across the globe. And I don't think there are an incredibly large number of people now, but I actually believe that visibility is simply increased and amplified by social media's expansive reach.
And on one hand, it might be a challenge, but on the other hand, it's also good that such topics are being discussed more openly, that they become more visible to the public eye, and that people perhaps take a closer, more detailed look. Before we delve deeper into the topic, we should, of course, do a brief definition. We had that in the episode back then too, and it was quite enlightening. Could you perhaps briefly describe what ADHD actually is for those who might not be familiar?
ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Disorder with or without hyperactivity, and is a complex condition. That's what the term stands for, spelled out. Ultimately, if you break it down, it is a deficiency of certain neurotransmitters in the brain, which can affect focus and impulse control. So, neurobiologically, a few neurotransmitters are missing or they are not sufficiently available at the right times. And that produces all the wonderful symptoms grouped under the broad term ADHD, impacting people's daily lives.
So ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Exactly.
And now you've already said there's this with and without the hyperactivity variant.
Exactly, right?
And that's why sometimes we read ADHD and sometimes ADD.
Right, exactly. Although quite many who work in the context with ADD also like to imply everyone involved. And when we talk about ADHD today, I sincerely wish for the listeners with ADD to feel equally addressed and valued. So those are the terms. And when we speak here today, I always try to make it crystal clear when it's really ADD, so without the hyperactivity, and conversely when it's really ADHD with hyperactivity, so ADD with an H. Exactly, this distinction is crucial.
That's why we talk so precisely and carefully about the terminology, so that we can include everyone when we discuss this important topic.
I would like to say one more thing, if I may, to circle back to the initial question about social media. We are living in an incredibly fast-paced world, and this actually produces for many people, especially in the digital context, all these digital media, these rapid changes, this quick succession of things we burden ourselves with in everyday life and leave us feeling overwhelmed. This leads many individuals to eventually exhibit symptoms strikingly similar to ADHD. It's important to remember that not everyone who can't concentrate effectively anymore, even in adulthood, necessarily has ADHD. It's worth considering how my everyday routine is overall structured and whether I haven't had far too much on my plate for many months to the point where my brain just decides to shut down completely at some unexpected and inconvenient point.
Very, very important note. We'll also go into a bit more detail on that shortly, but I think it's good that you mention it directly at this point. Today we are talking about the crucial and often overlooked topic of ADHD in adults. And there are many challenges related to this that need addressing. It is indeed the case that there are many people in Germany who struggle with ADHD symptoms or are affected by them, but who have not yet received a diagnosis and therefore do not have adequate treatment options readily available to them. A prominent example of an adult with ADHD is Eckhard von Hirschhausen, a well-known figure who has actively spoken about his experiences. What is the challenge in diagnosing adults with ADHD?
ADHD is a diagnosis of exclusion. Unfortunately, we don't have a single definitive marker that doctors can determine to say, yes, this is ADHD or ADD. This means that the older we get, the more difficult it becomes to make this exclusion diagnosis because more people need to be thoroughly questioned about their symptoms. This means looking at school reports. Adults then really have to dig out old things such as elementary school reports and ask parents how they were as a child, what things were like during that time. Additionally, they should dig into one's own memories, look at one's own life history and examine where there are disruptions. It's important to look for disruptions or repeated patterns in various areas. So the older we get, the more challenging and difficult it becomes to actually undertake and complete this comprehensive review. Nevertheless, a thorough diagnostic process can still be carried out effectively because modern concentration processes today can be evaluated through a variety of advanced and diverse diagnostic methods, independent of elementary school reports.
This means that the diagnosis is significantly more complex because many different factors need to be considered, and one must look deeply into one's childhood experiences. Was something important overlooked in childhood, or why does it only appear to manifest in adulthood even now?
So, I believe it's not always completely overlooked. It's like this: when children today grow up in a supportive family environment that perhaps intuitively provides the structures and necessary support suitable for their symptoms, and the children also happen to have a very high IQ, then they usually get through school quite well, I'd say. For many individuals, things get tight in university life. They start and suddenly realize when they move out that the familiar structure from home is completely gone. Many are identified in university who then decide to go for diagnostic evaluations. They often think, I can't manage my studies, something's wrong, I need to get this checked out immediately. And then parents say, yes, it was already a challenge here and there, but after discussing it extensively among ourselves, we adjusted this or that as parents, and then it worked, and the teachers also cooperated well, which significantly eased the transition. So if the external conditions are favorable, it can indeed happen that this doesn't really manifest in childhood and only emerges in adulthood when stress factors become too great, when compensation strategies no longer work effectively, then it truly comes to the surface or becomes the focus of concern for everyone involved.
You mentioned earlier that this is considered a diagnosis of exclusion. Can I understand that to mean that those affected might initially be diagnosed with other things, or perhaps first show noticeable and persistent symptoms of something else entirely?
Very, very frequently, it's quite often the case that adults in psychiatric outpatient clinics or from psychiatrists in general, for example, are diagnosed with depression. And nowadays, there are many clinics that are very, very mindful of this diagnosis in adults and also frequently conduct an ADHD assessment alongside, because the depression, particularly in adults, often arises from the constant compensation of symptoms, or there could actually be an undiagnosed underlying condition like ADHD. So that's something like depression, anxiety disorders. These are, you could say, two common diagnoses. And when you look closer, or when the doctors conduct more thorough examinations, they might say, there could be ADHD behind this, influencing the present symptoms. Let's treat that and observe what it does to the depression or anxiety disorder over time.
Are there certain life situations or phases that can fuel ADHD? I'm thinking about things like moving out of the parents' house. Until then, as you've said, they often manage it well. But then suddenly they're on their own, facing new responsibilities and expectations.
Yes. So actually, when the structure of the parental home is missing, but also in adulthood, when I start my own family, that's often the point. We have our own children, and we know today that ADHD is a genetic disposition, and if the children also have ADHD or ADD, then it often becomes too difficult for the affected adults to manage daily life, or it's just too much to compensate for their own symptoms, and also to support the children with all their challenges and unique needs. And then it happens that some adults actually experience burnout at some point. Yes, and only through the burnout, so here we have another issue, through the burnout they might realize, not only does my child have ADHD or ADD, maybe I should check myself too. Or doctors might realize during the conversation, you have children with ADHD, that's why you think you have burnout. Let's take a moment to check for you and see, how have you managed life so far? So these are significant moments in life, like starting your own family. And during such pivotal times, the stress might become overwhelming because of multiple factors.
That means through the diagnosis of the children, the parents sometimes only get to their own diagnosis?
Very, very often indeed, yes.
That's interesting. I had never thought of it that way and actually never heard that before. That's fascinating. So does that mean not only young people in young adulthood are affected by this, but it can even happen in later adulthood?
Yes, that actually happened to me. Sometimes I even come out with it. I am an affected adult myself, and with the birth of my first child and supporting my first child. And after his diagnosis, I decided to undergo diagnosis myself because I realized there might be something similar going on with me too, to my surprise. And indeed, that was the case.
Yes, it's really quite interesting. And now you just mentioned that you were diagnosed yourself. Now it's true that women are diagnosed much less frequently than men. The questionnaires are often male-oriented, which is a trend we often see in the field of medicine. So the old white man is typically the prototype for most medical research. And of course, this is a big challenge for modern medicine today and results in women being diagnosed less frequently and at a later stage in this case. Can one say that there are typically male and typically female symptoms in ADHD?
I wouldn't want to get myself into that situation, honestly. So when I think back to the adults I coach, I find that both men and women exhibit hyperactive and hypoactive symptoms quite frequently. I know women with high levels of impulsivity and anger. I've seen the same level of impulsivity and anger present in many men as well. There might be statistics about this, undoubtedly, but from my personal experience, specifically in coaching adults, I've seen all symptoms in both genders.
Do you have any idea why women are diagnosed less often?
We also see this in children, with girls still being diagnosed significantly less often than boys with certain conditions and developmental disorders. This could very well be a societal phenomenon. Unfortunately, during childhood, girls may still be more adaptable than boys, making it harder to recognize some issues. And for women, especially when there is a family involved, women in our society often still have the ingrained mindset that they must function and keep going. They may also be more self-critical, often focusing on what they did wrong instead of considering topics they might not be able to control well. I think it might be related to the way women define their roles and perhaps prefer not to put ourselves at the center and practice healthy self-care. I can imagine it might be because of that deeply ingrained mindset.
So it's not so much that it's different, but that it's simply perceived differently in society.
Yes, through the distribution of roles.
Okay, we're here at the PME Family Service in the context of systemic work. You yourself come from a strong background in systemic work, and we like to look at people's resources, strengths. So when we talk about an illness, we would say that there are not only bad or negative traits associated with it. And if we look at the career aspect, it's interesting to see how ADHD influences career choices or paths. Are there areas or specific things where people with ADHD are particularly good or maybe even less good?
Yes, I'm quite sure that when we look at resources and strengths, there are distinct strengths in the area of ADHD and ADD. At the same time, it is very individual, varying greatly from person to person. So if we look at the hyperactive types, and let's say we talk about a hyperactive persona, it may well be that these people are incredibly creative, enthusiastic, and also capable of taking others along with them on their journey. They often have pronounced leadership qualities and a strong competence in dealing effectively with other people, proactive, empathetic, and even reflective in adulthood, even though that may not yet be the case in childhood. Articulate with an expansive vocabulary, they often express themselves in a very eloquent manner. So you often find them in management roles where their skills truly shine. When we talk about ADHD in the professional world, you will indeed occasionally find someone with ADHD doing a very good job because their people management skills work remarkably well and creative processes work well. But these are the types of individuals you wouldn't typically put into monotonous tasks. So if someone with ADHD finds a niche or a career that suits their strengths, they're indeed lucky. But putting someone with ADHD in a job where they have to operate a repetitive process from 8 to 5 would be rather challenging and potentially frustrating. These are often the hyperactive ones without the hyperactivity who very much like, and I say often because you really can't generalize, but who often like to do one step after another, knowing exactly what to do and not getting bored by it, but needing it as a crucial part of their daily routine. Whereas the hyperactives would likely get bored in such fields and quickly lose interest.
Now it's like this. I don't have to disclose an illness or even a disability to my employer, and I myself have been paraplegic since birth. Essentially, it's none of their business at first. However, if as an employer I know that an employee has ADHD, what can I do as an employer to be supportive? How can I address it in a sensitive manner? How can I provide support to ensure they thrive in their role?
So I think, firstly, it's important to take a moment to look at what this diagnosis actually means. And I always recommend stepping away from terms like ADHD or ADD when communicating with schools or especially with employers. If I know where my ADHD affects me in my workday, then I can also articulate what I need from my employer to ensure success. For instance, I can say, pay attention, if I sit in an open plan office, I get distracted really quickly and can't concentrate well, and I can't complete the task given to me in the quality or time expected. I would need a quieter workspace or something to shield me a bit from distractions. Focusing on what becomes apparent and what I need helps more than just saying I have ADHD, because it's so varied and doesn't mean much to anyone unless they understand the nuances. And very few employers have people even in HR who are knowledgeable about this condition. It's a specific topic that requires education and understanding. Not everyone is familiar with it. Therefore, those affected should make it tangible and ask for help, saying, I have this challenge and what would help me is, can you support me? How can you meet me halfway?
So I don't even have to say, hello, I have ADHD, but I can simply directly say, look, this and this are what I find difficult, and I need such and such an environment to work really well and efficiently.
Exactly. Or please don't give me the same repetitive task for a week, because the result will be that I might make many mistakes or not finish it at all, which would be counterproductive. To stay focused and engaged, I always need something different and stimulating in between tasks. I actually have to artificially distract myself to be able to concentrate again, which sounds contradictory but truly helps. The versatility suits my way of working really well, so please give me variety in my tasks instead.
Are there any technical support options available? For example, are there time management tools or task management tools that you would suggest using? Do you know of any specific apps or software that you can recommend to people looking for reliable solutions?
So I believe that everyone has to find the right method for themselves here too. I know many people who say they still use a desk calendar as their primary planning tool. I'm always a bit surprised by this, but it's really up to everyone. Each person has their own thing and comfort zone. Some say that if they look at their digital calendar, they very quickly slip into Facebook, LinkedIn, or something distracting online. That's why they use a desk calendar to stay organized and focused throughout their busy day. Then there are others like me who say that everything runs digitally and I regularly use reminder functions on my smartphone. And then there are others who work with colorful post-its to structure themselves more effectively. The key is to try different things out and see what works best. Truly try out which method suits you best and fits your lifestyle. There are creative methods like Kanban boards, which you can set up in mini format on your desk or somewhere on a wall in your cozy home office space. That works too. And if you're in an office and say you can't concentrate because you're in a room with many colleagues, it can be very distracting. On the topic of technology, it's become established in schools by now as well in many other environments. You have headphones like today. And nowadays there are actually headphones similar to those for construction workers that provide some shielding and help you focus better. You might have to get used to them over time, but they can significantly help reduce external auditory signals and interruptions and distractions a bit.
One might think that open plan offices are rather bad for productivity and concentration. You just mentioned that headphones can be good for blocking out outside influences like noise. So one might think that for individuals with ADHD, working from home is a big advantage due to fewer distractions. Is that actually the case for most people though?
Yes and no. Again, yes and no. For many people who are easily distracted by external factors, but at the same time are able to organize and discipline themselves, working from home is probably a big gift that enhances their productivity significantly. However, I know many individuals, especially those with an ADHD disposition, who feel overwhelmed at home by everything. Let's say the washing machine beeps and then they have to get up instead of continuing to work on their Excel file. The kids come home and they're constantly distracted by various noises and activities. So the question is always, how well can I really focus on what I need to do amidst all these disruptions and manage my time effectively? And if I'm more disciplined in the office because I'm being observed by supervisors or colleagues, which is unfortunately sometimes the case, then the office environment with other colleagues and the structure of going there, having a specific workplace separate from my personal life, and leaving at a certain time might indeed be a better option than when the personal and professional lives mix confusingly at home. There's a clear boundary that helps maintain a healthier work-life balance, though this might be subjective for each individual. However, there are others who say it's a huge gift to be able to work from home because they no longer have the distraction from colleagues constantly interrupting them. And they can keep distractions at bay much better at home than in a bustling and noisy work environment. This needs to be determined through careful consideration and thorough discussion, and then, of course, negotiated with the employer accordingly and in a manner that satisfies all parties involved.
So I think what we have already learned up to this point is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for everybody, but it's always individual and everyone has to find out for themselves what works best for them personally.
Yes, and I believe that's also the biggest challenge for adults at first. There is no cure-all or single method of structuring our routines and maintaining focus. The first crucial step for adults is to observe themselves closely and identify what happens in their daily lives, specifically where they tend to drift off and where they begin to lose themselves. How long can they really concentrate on something before distractions creep in? This stage is purely observational, not evaluative, allowing for honest reflection without judgment. It's really necessary to perhaps work with a coach or a mentor who can offer some insights and see how we can manage and handle these challenges. What good can we make of it? Where should we support? What might be fine?
And I believe that in reality, this approach would help a lot of people in various situations. So putting aside ADHD, really looking individually at what do I need? Everyone thinks differently, and examining what each person needs to work well can be extremely beneficial and supportive in their daily lives.
I believe that is exactly the key to understanding this complex issue. The problem is that the ADHD brain ticks slightly differently from others. It simply functions differently from a brain that doesn't go through life with ADHD or ADD. The concentration span is lower and focusing doesn't work as efficiently as one might hope. We have an issue with procrastination, which can be particularly challenging. These are big, significant topics that deserve more attention. And because of this, it's hard to force oneself into tasks that must be done, especially when motivation is low. Everyone has processes that must be completed, for example, in the work context or in private life, such as completing assignments or managing daily chores. People with ADHD or ADD find these much harder than others due to their challenges with focus. It starts with household tasks like cleaning and goes right up to unpleasant office processes. People without ADHD or ADD can, let's say, politely force themselves to do them without too much trouble. They say it must be done now, let's finish it, and they manage it well, allowing them to meet deadlines effectively. But people with ADHD or ADD have to put an incredible effort into getting through it. It costs them a lot more energy. That's why they are often more exhausted. And that's why it is so important to look after them so that people with this disposition don't end up completely drained.
Also, once again, a very, very important note that needs to be emphasized. It's not that people with ADHD are unmotivated or lazy or anything like that. Rather, the energy they have to expend is just so unbelievably much higher than for other people. This means that for those who don't experience it, it's often just hard to comprehend. Sabina, we asked our listeners, or rather our community on Instagram, what they find interesting about this topic. And there were a few questions that came out during our recent discussion, and we carefully picked out 2 from the list and summarized them a bit for clarity. And I'd like to address them now to provide some guidance. The first question is, what should I do if all strategies and approaches I've tried have failed so far in achieving my desired outcome or goal?
You just said it wonderfully, focusing on a resource-oriented approach to the issues at hand. If all the strategies I've tried so far have failed, despite my best efforts and intentions, then my question would be, what haven't we tried yet? It's about opening up, and I truly believe reaching out to others for support. I often see that people feel a bit ashamed of these symptoms and don't talk about them openly. It absolutely doesn't have to be that way. Reaching out can lead to new perspectives and unexpected sources of help. So if I realize I'm not getting anywhere and I've tried everything from my perspective, the next step is to see what others are doing. I join a support group, get a coach who knows a lot about ADHD or ADD, and see what strategies others have tried that might also be worthwhile for me to try. I always believe there's a way and a solution for everything, and sometimes the solution is acceptance. We can't have all strengths, and that's okay. Embracing our limitations can often lead to unexpected growth and fulfillment. For example, acknowledging that being 3 minutes late is part of my personality, even after trying everything under the sun to improve my punctuality. You can try various things, including setting multiple alarms and planning extra time, but somehow everything is against me. Then consider what's the worst that could happen if I'm always 3 minutes late to a meeting or event. It's worth asking that question. Tardiness is definitely an issue, but it's entirely manageable if approached with the right mindset and strategies. Also, at work, say, I just can't seem to fix it. I'm always 3 minutes late. Can we work something out to improve this situation? Talking about it is key, as communication can lead to a better understanding.
People who speak can be helped?
Yes.
Yes, and perhaps at this point it's also essential to be aware that I'm not alone in this situation, and other people might feel the same way. And when I talk to others, I've noticed that people genuinely do want to help and offer support. If I'm open about it, I'm much more likely to find a sympathetic ear than I might think if I feel like I can't talk about it openly. Another question that came up during our discussion was about the degree of disability or compensatory support available. So is there something like compensatory support for people living with ADHD in a professional, educational, or perhaps even personal context today?
I know this in the context of children at school. Actually, I have to say at this point, I am probably less knowledgeable than the person asking the question in their specialized profession. In the adult context, I haven't looked into this at all. I couldn't answer that with a simple yes or no, since it would require more research and understanding. You can apply for a care level for children with severe ADHD, and it's possible that something similar to compensation for disadvantages could be available in adulthood as a result of this history, although the specifics would need to be verified. But I would first have to check into it myself thoroughly. This is something that one can certainly inquire about. Health insurance companies and pension insurance companies might be contacts, as well as doctors. Yes, I haven't actually encountered it before. Not even the question, which I find really, really interesting and thought-provoking. Yes, definitely.
Okay, then I would say in the spirit of being genuinely helpful, we will research that again and provide detailed information on the degree of disability, care level, and disadvantage compensation in the show notes.
Yes, that's great.
Well, now it's like this. We don't just consist of professional aspects, but we also have a private life that is equally important. Yes, and you don't only deal with people with ADHD at work, but also in private life. Of course, a person who is impulsive and has many projects and many ideas can be very exciting and full of energy. At the same time, it can also be very exhausting, especially when there is a constant need to keep up with their rapid pace. I recently heard the term hyperfocus in relation to ADHD. That also plays a significant role in relationship life. In your experience, what are the particular challenges and unexpected dynamics that arise in relationships or friendships with people who have ADHD? And how do they impact communication and understanding between individuals?
Often people with ADHD or ADD actually find themselves in meaningful relationships. I find that quite intriguing and fascinating. Two people may get together in a partnership without knowing that they or their partner have ADHD or ADD, and often they don't even know it about themselves until much later. Frequently, which is also interesting and quite common, you find these mismatched pairs in social interactions. For example, a person with ADD meets someone with ADHD, and that can lead to significant challenges in their relationship. A hyperactive person paired with a hyperactive person doesn't automatically mean they will have a lot of understanding for each other from the start. It requires effort and communication to bridge the gap between their differing energy levels and perspectives. One is constantly on the go, always awake, both an early bird and a night owl, while the other person takes much longer for everything, has to think about a decision 20 times, and maybe needs more sleep to recharge their mind and body. There's a lot of dynamic tension between them. However, if the two people affected come to realize, we both have it, but oppositely, then it can become really fruitful because the mutual understanding is greater since they can somewhat understand each other's struggle and appreciate their unique perspectives. But if one person in a relationship has ADD or ADHD and the other does not, it can be truly difficult because people with ADHD often have unstable moods that fluctuate unpredictably. So you might lose control of your emotions more easily, take things from a different perspective, and be much more attuned to subtle nuances, which can be challenging in a relationship because they can be hard to endure. So I'll spill the beans now. I, with my relentless hyperactivity, had a partner who had nothing to do with this topic, and he would say, I can't take your energy. It's just too overwhelming for me at times, and I feel exhausted. You've got so many balls in the air right now. I get dizzy just watching you. Honestly, I can't even keep track or watch for too long without feeling overwhelmed myself. Enduring what this hyperactivity produces in everyday life is challenging. Imagine a full-time working mother with ADHD who comes home after 10 hours of work. As she enters, she immediately goes to the washing machine with her backpack still on, grabs the laundry to hang up, perhaps turns on the stove at the same time, and says good evening to the children. That's absolutely crazy and chaotic. Experiencing that as someone with or without ADHD can be extremely exhausting and overwhelming. Additionally, issues like procrastination often arise, delaying things further. Financial issues such as managing money are huge topics for many, like submitting taxes on time and keeping appointments. For those without ADHD who are usually well organized, this can already be quite overwhelming. Yes.
That means on one hand juggling many tasks, but on the other hand procrastinating or delaying things because it takes so much energy.
Yes, exactly, because these are the things that one must do, especially everything that involves money, where you have to sit down and focus intensely. So tax returns, I don't know if you can relate to this tedious task. It's something people also tend to do at the last minute, right? Others do it too, hastily, often in a rush. It's not just because of ADHD, but that definitely adds to it. And also dealing with money, this forward planning and acting strategically is crucial. What do I have for this month? What does the family have saved up? And can I really book this cruise I saw advertised last week? Or should I talk to my partner about it first to make sure we're on the same page? Yes, it can really lead to serious financial consequences if not handled properly. Then, of course, when children are involved, genetic conditions also come into play, like ADHD. When one parent has it, it's even more exhausting for the non-ADHD parent, who is often left handling the majority of the organizational tasks. Suddenly, there are children with this symptom too, and then this person stands there not knowing what's happening. And these people with ADD or ADHD in the family feel really comfortable in their bubble. So that's already exhausting. I can really only advise everyone in such situations to seek help as a couple as well, to build knowledge and secure understanding on both sides for better harmony at home. Because people affected by ADHD or ADD are the way they are, and they don't understand what the other person doesn't understand or where the problem is. So both need a translator to ensure the partnership can succeed.
Okay, in such a case, if you realize you're reaching your limits, it's better to get help sooner rather than later.
Definitely.
I think that's generally a good point. Better early than too late.
Yes, absolutely.
Since we're still on the topic of relationships, are there any noticeable different effects of ADHD in relationships between men and women?
So, not directly from ADHD, but in women, it has been found through comprehensive studies that hormones significantly affect neurotransmitters. This means that depending on what stage of life the woman is in, ADHD symptoms can actually be exacerbated by these varying hormonal issues. This means, for example, that iron in particular has a strong influence on dopamine production in the brain. If there is an iron deficiency during menstruation or in general, since maintaining iron levels is an ongoing issue for many women, it can mean that if I have ADHD as a woman, I should always keep a close and careful eye on my blood levels. Hormones like estrogen can significantly affect various neurotransmitter systems. So estrogen also has an impact on dopamine and serotonin, two very important neurotransmitters for us when we talk about ADHD. Now, when women reach menopause and their hormone levels decrease in a more consistent manner, it's often the case that they struggle at work and can't manage everything they've been juggling so far because they feel like nothing works anymore. This is definitely a moment where one should seriously consider getting their hormone levels checked. Remember that hormones along with iron levels have a direct effect on neurotransmitters, and with existing ADHD symptoms, this can significantly amplify them. It's inconvenient for all women, I would say, but if I have ADHD as a woman, then it's doubly inconvenient, and I really need to pay attention because it can be a challenge in relationships, of course. If I'm additionally triggered by hormonal issues or imbalances, we also have the complicated topic of mood swings, such as periodic mood swings. And if ADHD is added to that, along with missing hormones or fluctuating iron levels, then it's truly a significant challenge, especially in relationships. But most of all, it's an immense challenge for the women.
Does it make sense to talk to the doctor about your current symptoms and possibly take extra iron supplements or support it with some effective medication?
Definitely. Always take a look first. So, if you don't need something, you shouldn't take it, but check your iron levels regularly. I think it's fundamentally an important note for women with ADHD to say, please keep an eye on your iron levels for overall health. And for women who are slowly approaching menopause, please get a hormone status check and really consider whether introducing artificial hormones makes sense in some areas. Really talk to experienced doctors about it, as it's a special topic that requires careful consideration. Not every gynecologist will ask if you have ADHD during your appointment. They typically don't do that. You have to remember to mention it yourself if it's relevant to your visit.
Okay, so to be attentive and take the initiative yourself, and also speak directly and openly with the doctor. Yes, Sabina, you can tell we could talk about this fascinating topic for hours.
Yeah.
Slowly, we need to move towards wrapping up and bringing our conversation to an ending. And if someone has followed our conversation up to this point and somehow feels like this relates to them, is there some kind of checklist or certain indicators where one can confidently say, if I can check off all these points or criteria, then the likelihood is very high that this topic, ADHD, relates to me and my personal experiences or struggles?
So there are checklists. And if you search on the internet today, you'll actually find checklists offered specifically tailored for adults. This makes it much easier for people to understand their own symptoms and challenges. So there's no need to search for long and exhaustive information. If you type in ADHD adult checklist in your browser, you'll also find a helpful resource so you can at least get an idea for yourself without having to share it with anyone if you don't want to. These resources are readily available, and I think one should definitely use them to gain insights. And this checklist, once you have carefully created one and filled it out, it's definitely worth saving or printing it for your records. And if you decide at any point to see a doctor or healthcare professional, you should carefully take it with you.
You're actually already leading into my next question, which is quite fascinating. If such tests show that there might be something to it, then it comes to the topic of diagnostics, which is crucial. So how does such a diagnostic actually work?
Actually, diagnostics is not really difficult. I go to a psychiatrist and they are usually able, along with psychologists, to conduct diagnostics thoroughly. But I just need the experienced doctors who can do that. So I need a psychologist for the diagnostics and a psychiatrist to say it makes sense to do the diagnostics. And it's really, really difficult to find practices for adults, unfortunately, due to the overwhelming demand. So what is already a challenge with children is even more so with adults because of the complexities involved. I now often recommend, depending on the federal state, the psychiatric clinics. They are not always the first point of contact, but very often they can at least accompany you during the diagnostic part or can give you an address to turn to before you end up on 20 waiting lists.
Yes, and if I have a diagnostic test or get an appointment, will that be covered by the health insurance? Or do I have to pay for it myself? Or how does that work?
The health insurance covers it if a doctor says, yes, the symptoms are there and we need to check it out thoroughly. So it's a medical procedure that certainly has its relevance and significance. One doesn't go to a psychiatrist for no reason. There's usually a compelling need. And if the doctor says we have a limitation here with the patient, then the diagnostic process is, of course, also covered by the insurance policy.
Okay. We will, of course, include a link to such a detailed questionnaire in the show notes for our listeners, and you can look into it more closely there at your convenience. Dear Sabina, that was an exciting conversation on a highly interesting topic that has really captured the curiosity of many. I can imagine we might receive some reactions and inquiries from our audience. If that's the case, we would definitely get back in touch with you and see if we can address those reactions or questions afterwards. So if there are people who have questions or need further clarification about this topic, feel free to contact podcast@familienservice.de. Thank you for your time and your expertise that you brought with you today. And of course, the last words are yours.
Yes, I sincerely thank you for the interesting questions and the nice talk. And yes, please feel free to support this endeavor wholeheartedly. So if there are more questions and we have another topic that I said I don't really know much about, please do bring it up. I'm more than happy to be available for any further discussions because this topic truly thrives on exchange of diverse perspectives. And I can only encourage every adult, if they feel there's an ADHD or ADD symptom, not to shy away from talking about it openly and honestly with others. Get started. This might be a hurdle sometimes, but very often this seemingly daunting symptomatology is also an enrichment in life. And there are distinct strengths that you also have, which can certainly be utilized in various situations. Thank you, Ollie.
Thank you.